Picture this. It's the year 401 BC. You are standing in the middle of a vast, unforgiving desert landscape.
Just entirely desolate.
Exactly. The heat is suffocating, the dust is choking you, and the reality of your situation is slowly beginning to set in.
And it's a terrifying reality.
Oh, absolutely terrifying. Because you are one of 10,000 Greek mercenaries, and you are currently stranded, well, about 1,500 miles from home, deep in the heart of the Persian Empire.
Right, completely hostile territory.
Yeah, and the man who hired you, this prince named Cyrus the Younger, he's lying dead on the battlefield of Canaxa.
He took a javelin to the eye, right?
A javelin right to the eye while he was, trying to usurp the throne from his brother. So you actually won your specific part of the battle, but because your employer is dead, the war is instantly lost.
It's all over.
It's over. And just when you think the situation cannot possibly get any worse, your commanding officers, the generals who are supposed to negotiate your safe passage out of this nightmare, are invited to a peace conference.
By the Persian commander Tissaphernes.
Right. And it's a false flag of truce. Your generals are seized, their throats are slit, and the remaining leadership is basically decapitated in a single stroke.
Completely wiped out.
You have no map. You have no cavalry to, scout ahead. You have no food supplies. And you have absolutely no leader.
I mean, it is the absolute definition of a worst-case scenario.
Yeah.
We are talking about a systemic, catastrophic collapse of an entire military structure here.
It's just total chaos.
Right. You're surrounded by hundreds of thousands of hostile forces, completely isolated from the Mediterranean world, you understand. And the commanders who held all the political and logistical knowledge of how to navigate this terrain, they're just gone.
10,000 stranded soldiers in the ancient equivalent of a hostile alien planet. Okay, let's unpack this. It's a corporate nightmare where the entire C-suite vanishes overnight, but instead of worrying about stock prices, you're worrying about constant, looming annihilation.
The stakes literally could not be higher.
So today, we are doing a deep dive into one of the most incredible survival stories in human history. We're looking at Xenophon's Anabasis.
It really is a foundational text.
Yeah, it's this masterclass on leadership, crisis management, and survival. And we'll be looking at it alongside his other work, the Cyropaedia. But we're going beyond just ancient military history here.
Right, because we want to take Xenophon's pragmatic, hard-won wisdom from the desert and lay it side by side with a biblical theology of leadership.
Exactly, because the Anabasis functions as this profound laboratory on human character.
It really does. It tests what kinds of people survive and what kinds of leaders emerge. When every single structural advantage, every title, every institutional safety net is just stripped away completely.
And by comparing this ancient Greek model with the biblical model, we're going to uncover some incredibly deep, timeless truths about, well, the nature of authority, the anatomy of character, and the mechanics of divine calling.
And ultimately, examining the absolute peak of human leadership in Xenophon points us directly to the perfect servant leadership of Jesus Christ.
So let's go right to the immediate aftermath of that betrayal by the Persians.
The night of despair.
Yeah, Book 3, Chapter 1. The generals have just been murdered. The army is completely paralyzed. It's the middle of the night, and the camp is a total disaster.
Men aren't sleeping. They aren't eating.
No. They are just lying on the ground next to their weapons, completely overwhelmed by this crushing realization that they are never going to see their families again. They're basically just waiting to be slaughtered in the morning.
And, the psychological weight of that night, it really cannot be overstated. Xenophon paints a picture of total systemic paralysis.
Nobody knows what to do.
Right. There are no watchfires being lit. There are no sentries being posted at the perimeter. The soldiers are experiencing this collective trauma that completely short-circuits their military training.
And into this massive vacuum of authority steps Xenophon himself, which is the craziest part of this entire narrative.
It really is.
Because Xenophon isn't some decorated general, right? He's not even a hardened veteran captain in this mercenary army. He's a private citizen.
Just a civilian.
Yeah, he literally just tagged along on this Persian expedition as a civilian observer because his friend Proxenus, who unfortunately happens to be one of the generals whose throat was just cut, invited him to come along and seek his fortune.
He has zero formal rank. He possesses no structural authority whatsoever to issue a single order.
Nothing.
But as he's lying there on the ground, unable to sleep like the rest of the terrified men around him, He falls into this restless state and has a really vivid, terrifying dream.
Oh, the dream. Yeah.
He dreams that a massive lightning bolt strikes his father's house and sets the entire estate blazing.
A lightning bolt striking his father's house.
Mhm.
I mean, that feels incredibly ominous, especially for an ancient Greek, right?
Oh, entirely. In the Hellenic worldview, lightning is the direct weapon of Zeus, specifically Zeus the king. So Xenophon wakes up in a cold sweat and interprets this dream in a fascinating dualistic way.
Okay, also.
Well, on one hand, it's a sign of hope. It's a great light shining in the absolute darkness of their predicament, sent from the supreme deity.
Right.
But on the other hand, a fire sparked by lightning that engulfs a house. That is a severe warning about the suffocating, hemmed-in reality of their situation. The blaze represents the Persian army closing in around them.
It's trapped they can't escape.
Exactly. And this dream prompts an internal dialogue that effectively changes the course of Western history.
Wow.
He asks himself, and I'll just quote the idea here, "Why am I lying here? The night advances. With the day, the enemy will be upon us. What am I waiting for?"
He says, am I waiting for a general to undertake the work?
Right. Am I waiting till I am older? Older I shall never be, if today I betray myself to my enemies.
Why am I lying here? That is such a powerful question. He doesn't look around for someone else with a fancier helmet or a louder voice to fix the problem.
No, he doesn't.
He assesses the paralysis, realizes absolutely nobody is coming to save them, and he just gets up.
And that internal realization forms the absolute core of the Anabasis principle of initiative. The true leader is the one who acts not because a title or mantle of authority has been formally handed to them by an institution,
Right.
but because a critical, life-threatening need is highly visible and no one else is moving to address it. Xenophon doesn't wait for the morning light or the Persian cavalry to force his hand.
He rises while the rest of the army lies frozen in dread. So he gathers the remaining junior captains in the dead of night, and he delivers this speech that is just an absolute masterclass in ancient rhetoric.
It really is brilliant.
He soberly analyzes the massive threat they're facing, breaking down the Persian tactics, but then he executes this brilliant psychological maneuver. He doesn't demand that they make him their commander.
Not at all.
He offers to follow or lead. He tells them basically, if you want to lead us out of this trap, I am right behind you. I won't use my youth as an excuse to avoid following your orders, but if you want me to take the helm, I will step up.
He intentionally defers status.
Yeah, he forces the community to willingly invest authority in him rather than trying to, seize it by force.
Because the Greek cultural concept operating here is pitho, the art of persuasion. In a society of free citizens, even mercenary ones, command cannot simply be dictated.
Right, they have to agree to it.
It must be earned through rational argument and perceived virtue. By offering to subordinate himself to any capable volunteer, Xenophon proves his primary motive is the collective survival of the group.
Not a selfish grab for power in a vacuum.
Exactly. And the captains, recognizing his incredible clarity of thought and the purity of his character in that dark moment, they immediately elect him to help lead the retreat.
Okay, hold on though, because we are praising this guy for stepping up. But let's apply this to a modern scenario.
Okay, let's do it.
If the CEO and the entire executive board of a Fortune 500 company suddenly disappear,
Right.
and a junior intern wakes up from a dream in the middle of the night, walks into the boardroom and says, I'm in charge now. Let's restructure the company. I'm calling security.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, how is Xenophon's move not just a recipe for massive disaster born out of sheer unchecked arrogance? Isn't there a huge danger there?
That is the exact tension we need to interrogate. Because human initiative generated purely from within the human mind is incredibly dangerous.
Right.
It is highly susceptible to delusion, arrogance, and, the Dunning-Kruger effect, where the least competent people are often the most confident in their abilities.
Well, we all worked with that guy.
Yes, we have. And Xenophon's call to leadership, as brilliant as it turns out to be, is entirely internal. He assesses the external crisis, looks inward at his own reasoning, decides he is capable, and acts.
It all comes from within.
Exactly. And this is precisely where the ancient Greek model of self-generated virtue and the biblical model of calling fundamentally diverge.
Because biblical leaders rarely wake up and just decide they're going to overthrow an empire on their own authority, do they?
Not at all. Look closely at the ultimate biblical parallel to this crisis. Moses at the burning bush in Exodus chapters 3 and 4.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Structurally, the historical situations share remarkable similarities. You have an obscure, exiled man, completely removed from any formal halls of power,
Right.
who is not seeking a leadership role, who suddenly encounters a massive crisis involving a group of people trapped in bondage and facing annihilation.
But the mechanism of the calling is different.
Totally different. The source of the initiative is a complete inversion of Xenophon's experience. Moses isn't lying in his tent, having a philosophical realization about his own potential.
Right, he's just out tending sheep.
He is minding his own business in the Midianite wilderness when he is violently interrupted by an external, objective phenomenon. God calls to him from the burning bush.
I have seen the misery of my people.
Yes, God says, I have come down to deliver them. The initiative does not originate in the human heart. It originates entirely in the divine will.
And Moses' reaction is the total opposite of Xenophon saying, "What am I waiting for?"
Completely opposite.
Moses throws up every roadblock imaginable. He says, "Who am I that I should go?" He claims the people won't believe him. He argues that he's never been eloquent and he stutters. He actively, almost aggressively resists the call.
It is a genuine, deep-seated resistance that God has to forcefully override. Whereas Xenophon's initiative emerges organically from his own intellectual self-assessment, Moses' commission comes crashing in from the outside.
Oh, yeah.
And if we trace this theological through line to the New Testament, we find the ultimate perfect expression of this dynamic in the incarnation itself.
In Philippians 2, right?
Exactly. In Philippians 2:5-11, the Apostle Paul paints a picture of Christ that just shatters the Greek heroic ideal. Jesus doesn't gaze down at the crisis of human sin, assess the spiritual vacuum, and simply decide on his own initiative to stage a cosmic rescue mission.
He doesn't seize the authority. Paul says he didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped or exploited.
Right. He is sent by the Father. Paul writes in Galatians 4:4, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son.
It's all about being sent.
Throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus repeatedly emphasizes a truth that would baffle a Greek philosopher. He insists he does absolutely nothing on his own initiative, but only speaks what the Father gives him to speak and does what he sees the Father doing.
So when we analyze biblical figures who appear to take dramatic, sudden initiative,
Like Nehemiah.
Nehemiah inspecting the ruined walls of Jerusalem by moonlight, or Esther deciding to approach the Persian king unsummoned at the risk of her life, or even Gideon threshing wheat in a winepress to hide from the Midianites.
Right.
Their actions are never framed as the result of personal internal discernment. They're acting in direct, obedient response to a divine framework that God is already orchestrating around them.
Exactly.
We see this tension in our own lives constantly. If you're a mid-level manager or a parent or just a member of a community, you have undoubtedly faced a vacuum of leadership.
We all have.
A moment where things are falling apart and nobody is stepping into the gap. The challenge Xenophon presents is powerful. Do you have the courage to act when everyone else is paralyzed? But the biblical challenge goes so much deeper.
Much deeper.
When you do step into that gap, are you acting on the fumes of your own ambition and your own inflated sense of competence? Or are you prayerfully responding to what God is calling you to do?
Because the defining characteristic of a biblical leader is that they rise in submission to the Creator, not merely in reaction to the crisis. Their authority is derived, never self-generated.
That's beautifully said. So Xenophon takes the reins, but we really have to understand the wreckage he inherited.
Oh, it was a mess.
He had to step up because the previous leadership completely failed. And Xenophon doesn't just gloss over those dead generals.
No, he dissects them.
He really does.
Yeah.
In Book 2 of the Anabasis, he pauses the entire narrative of the retreat to provide deep psychological profiles of the murdered commanders.
It's a literary technique called ethopia, character sketching.
Right. And it serves as a profound dissection of why leaders fail under pressure.
He identifies 3 distinct typologies of leadership failure, personified by 3 different men. And the psychological mechanics he unpacks are startlingly relevant today.
They really are.
He shows us exactly why certain models of authority inevitably collapse, regardless of the historical era.
Let's start with Clearchus. Xenophon describes this guy as a man who essentially treated war as his mistress.
He loved the fight.
He was a Spartan exile, incredibly harsh, savage in his punishments, and he ruled his men entirely through fear. Now, Xenophon admits Clearchus was brilliant in a crisis.
Very competent.
Yeah, he understood logistics, he knew how to feed an army, and when the arrows were flying, the men looked to him for survival. But the moment the battle ended, Xenophon notes that the soldiers abandoned Clearchus like schoolboys fleeing from a cruel, abusive schoolmaster.
Clearchus embodies the martial tyrant. His entire methodology of command relies on structural authority and the threat of severe physical violence.
It's all just force.
The psychological mechanic here is purely utilitarian. As long as the external threat of the enemy, the Persians in this case, is objectively scarier than Clearchus, the men will obey his orders because he is their best chance at staying alive.
Right, because the alternative is worse.
But fear is an inexhaustible resource. The instant that external, life-threatening pressure is relieved, Clearchus's authority evaporates into thin air.
It just vanishes.
Because it isn't grounded in mutual respect, shared vision, or genuine care for the flourishing of his followers. He leads by terror, which means he only commands bodies, not hearts.
It's the difference between someone following you because they want to and following you because you're holding a gun to their head.
Exactly.
Then, on the complete opposite end of the moral spectrum, you have Menon. His profile is chilling.
Menon is terrifying.
Menon is the ultimate amoral Machiavellian pragmatist.
Hmm.
Xenophon tells us that Menon literally viewed honesty and truthfulness as forms of intellectual stupidity.
He thought being good meant you were dumb.
Yeah. He cultivated friendships for the sole purpose of exploiting those friends later. He maintained discipline not by punishing his soldiers' crimes, but by actively participating in their crimes, thereby making them accomplices who couldn't betray him without betraying themselves.
And, Menon's fate is the most gruesome of all the generals. While the others are swiftly beheaded by the Persians, Menon is kept alive, tortured for an entire year, and dies in utter disgrace.
Wow.
But Xenophon's critique here isn't just a moralistic finger-wagging exercise. His core argument is that corruption, utilized as a leadership strategy, is practically and systematically self-defeating.
It doesn't work long term.
You simply cannot build a lasting, cohesive organization on a foundation of deception. When trust is eradicated, the entire structure eventually implodes under the weight of its own paranoia.
Which brings us to the third general, Proxenus. And this is the profile that really stopped me in my tracks.
Yes, Proxenus is fascinating.
Xenophon calls Proxenus, who was actually his personal friend, a naive idealist. He notes that Proxenus was highly educated, he studied under famous philosophers, and he possessed the art of leading gentlemen.
Right.
But he was fundamentally too nice. He feared the disapproval of his men more than his men feared his discipline, so the absolute worst characters in the army quickly learned to manipulate and exploit him.
They walked all over him.
Now here's where it gets really interesting, because isn't being gentle and empathetic the hallmark of a modern enlightened leader? I mean, Proxenus sounds like the manager everyone wants to work for, the guy who just wants a collaborative, harmonious environment. Why is Xenophon so brutal in his assessment of this guy?
Because empathy without boundaries and compassion without enforceability inevitably invites chaos.
Wow.
The fatal flaw of the nice guy leader is a lack of moral courage. Proxenus wanted the affection of his troops more than he wanted their effectiveness or their survival.
You just wanted to be liked.
Right. When a leader refuses to confront toxic behavior, enforce discipline, or punish insubordination because they are terrified of being disliked, their niceness weaponizes the worst elements of the organization.
By refusing to punish the bad soldiers, he was actively abandoning the good soldiers. His empathy for the rule breakers became cruelty to the rule followers.
Precisely the mechanic. He couldn't protect his functional troops because he was paralyzed by his need to appease his dysfunctional ones.
That is so relevant today.
Oh, completely. Now, contrast these three ancient typologies of failure with the biblical requirements for leadership. Look at the pastoral qualifications the Apostle Paul lays out for elders and overseers in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1.
It's a very specific list.
The list is astonishing because it is almost entirely devoid of what we would call skills or competencies. A biblical leader must be above reproach, sober-minded, self-controlled, hospitable, not a drunkard, not violent but gentle, and not a lover of money.
Out of that massive list, there is only one actual functional competency mentioned, able to teach. Every single other requirement is a metric of internal character.
Right. And the biblical assumption underlying this is profound. A person possessing the right sanctified character will naturally utilize whatever competencies they have for the nourishment and protection of the flock.
But a person with bad character,
The person harboring bad character will inevitably weaponize their competencies for their own self-aggrandizement. Menon is the textbook example of weaponized intellect. The writer of Proverbs hits this directly in chapter 11, verse 2. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with the humble is wisdom.
so true.
Menon was vastly too proud to be honest and far too clever to be trustworthy, and his intellect dug his own grave.
And Clearchus is the exact embodiment of what Jesus warns about in John chapter 10. Jesus describes the hired hand who sees the wolf coming, abandons the sheep, and runs away into the night.
He flees.
Why does he run? Because he doesn't own the sheep. He doesn't actually care about them. His authority is purely transactional, just a job title. When the cost of leadership outweighs the paycheck, he bolts.
Exactly.
But Jesus says the good shepherd stays, fights the wolf, and even lays down his life because his core character binds him to the flock.
Clearchus's men ran from him the moment the battle ended, just as the hired hand runs from the sheep the moment the wolf appears. The relationship is utterly devoid of covenantal love.
There's no bond there.
But this discussion of character brings us to a massive, insurmountable philosophical wall where Xenophon's ancient worldview crashes into biblical reality.
Okay, where do they clash?
Xenophon was heavily influenced by his mentor, Socrates. He deeply believed that virtue was essentially an educational skill. This is a massive theme in his other major work, the Cyropaedia, where he outlines the ideal education of a ruler.
Right.
The Greek assumption is that if you provide the right environment, the right philosophical training, and the right habits, you can effectively manufacture a good human being.
It's the ultimate self-help philosophy. Just attend enough leadership seminars, read the right scrolls, optimize your daily routines, and you will eventually forge yourself into a person of unshakable integrity.
And the Bible shatters that illusion completely. The prophet Jeremiah writes in chapter 17, verse 9, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it?"
We are broken at the core.
The scriptural argument is that the core of the human problem isn't a lack of education. It is a fundamental corruption of nature. True character, the kind of character that doesn't fracture under the sheer terror of a Persian army or the temptation of an emperor's gold, cannot be merely learned through habituation.
It has to be given.
It must be regenerated. It is a fruit of the Holy Spirit, as Paul describes in Galatians 5. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Xenophon's rigorous school of pragmatic leadership might produce a highly disciplined soldier, but only the supernatural work of the Spirit can produce a new heart.
You cannot train away the darkness inherent in the human soul. That is a heavy foundational difference.
It really is.
So we've established that true leadership demands this profound inner character. But character isn't just an abstract theory, right? It has to physically manifest when the environment turns lethal.
Yes, it has to be tested in the real world.
And to see this, we follow the Greek army into Book 4 of the Anabasis. They have managed to fight their way out of the desert, but now they are marching north through the towering, rugged mountains of Armenia.
Into the snow.
It is the dead of winter, and the conditions are apocalyptic.
The environmental shift is staggering. The temperature plummets far below freezing, and they are caught in the teeth of a massive, unrelenting blizzard.
Guys who just survived the desert are now freezing.
Exactly. Men who survived the Persian cavalry are now dropping dead in the snow. The baggage animals are freezing in their tracks. The soldiers are suffering from severe frostbite, losing toes and fingers.
It's brutal.
And the snow is falling at such an intense rate that as the exhausted men collapse and try to sleep on the bare ground, the snow completely buries them, their armor, and their weapons.
Xenophon records this bizarre, terrifying detail about human physiology in extreme cold. He observes that the men actually wanted to stay buried under the snowdrifts because the snow was acting as an insulating blanket.
It trapped their heat.
It was trapping their body heat, it felt warm, but it's a lethal seduction. If they stay under that snow, they will fall into a deep sleep, freeze to death, or be easily slaughtered by the local tribesmen tracking them. They absolutely have to get up and keep moving.
And notice carefully what Xenophon does not do in this moment of crisis.
Right.
He does not retreat to a warm command tent, wrap himself in furs, and send a runner out into the blizzard to bark orders at the freezing men.
Get up, guys.
Right. He intuitively understands that structural authority, the power to shout commands, is completely impotent against the seductive physiological warmth of the snow.
Shouting won't work.
So he utilizes a different mechanism. Xenophon strips off his heavy, warm winter cloak in sub-zero weather. He picks up an axe, marches out into the blizzard in his tunic, and begins physically splitting massive logs to build fires for the army.
He intentionally takes off his cloak. He deliberately exposes his own body to the freezing cold, taking on the heavy, exhausting manual labor of the lowest private soldier.
Exactly.
And when the freezing men peek out from under their snowdrifts and see their commanding general shivering, swinging an axe without a winter jacket, they are deeply, viscerally shamed. but they're also inspired.
It wakes them up.
They start crawling out of the snow, picking up their own axes and helping him. I love the sheer drama of this. I mean, think of an executive taking an undercover boss stunt to the absolute extreme.
But the danger of the undercover boss analogy is that a television executive knows that at the end of the shift, they put their designer suit back on and return to their mansion.
That's a good point.
Xenophon isn't performing a stunt. He is engaging in highly risky behavior. By stripping off his cloak in an Armenian blizzard, he is risking real hypothermia.
He could die.
He could lose his own fingers to frostbite. He could catch pneumonia and die, which would leave the army leaderless again.
And that's the logical objection, isn't it? Doesn't a military commander have a duty to stay safe, conserve his physical energy, and keep his mind sharp so he can make strategic decisions? I mean, why risk your own life and the stability of the army just to chop some wood? It borders on irresponsibility.
It absolutely contradicts standard military self-preservation. But what's fascinating here is that Xenophon realizes a deeper truth. In this specific moment, shared suffering is the only viable strategy.
That's the only way to move them.
He isn't just chopping wood, he is manufacturing moral authority in real time. The unique authority required to make freezing, exhausted men stand up and face death cannot be commanded by rank alone.
It has to be earned.
It must be purchased through shared vulnerability. He has to physically prove that he is not asking his soldiers to endure a single hardship that he is not actively willing to endure himself. He outlines this exact theory in the Cyropaedia, stating that an ideal leader must exceed his followers in endurance. If it's the heat of summer, the general must share more of the sun than the troops. He must sweat more, freeze more, and work harder to earn the deep, unshakable devotion of his subjects.
As soon as you describe a supreme leader voluntarily stripping off his protective cloak to enter the freezing, lethal reality of his people, the theological implications just light up for me. It points directly to the incarnation of Jesus Christ.
It is perhaps the most beautiful and profound parallel in our entire discussion. The writer of Hebrews states in chapter 4, verse 15, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin."
Right.
Why does Jesus possess the ultimate authority to intercede for humanity? Because he intimately shared our brutal experience.
He didn't shout theological commands from the safety and warmth of heaven.
No, Jesus didn't orchestrate salvation from a safe cosmic distance. Paul tells us in Philippians 2 that Christ emptied himself. He took off his cloak of divine, unapproachable glory.
That's a beautiful image.
He stepped down into the freezing, lethal snowstorm of human existence, taking on the frail vulnerability of human flesh. He shared our hardship completely. He experienced physical hunger in the desert, the deep betrayal of his closest friends, the cold of the night, and ultimately the agony of death.
The man of sorrows.
Exactly. Isaiah 53 describes him as a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. This total immersion into human suffering is exactly how Christ earns the unassailable authority to lead his people home.
It completely inverts the worldly expectation of what leadership costs.
Yeah.
It's not about rising above the pain of your followers. It's about descending into it. The Apostle Peter instructs church elders in 1 Peter 5 not to be domineering over their flocks, but to be living examples. Paul tells young Timothy to share in suffering as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. If the commanding general is out in the blizzard shivering, you have absolutely no excuse to stay hidden in your tent.
The biblical leader refuses to stand above the difficulty directing traffic. They step inside the difficulty and lead the way out.
So Xenophon proved his willingness to share physical burdens, freezing right alongside his men. But what struck me as I read the sources is that he also refused to take the easy way out, emotionally and socially.
He was brutally honest.
He constantly, relentlessly embraced hard truths, even when he knew those truths would make the army furious with him.
Radical transparency and unflinching accountability are the twin pillars of Xenophon's command style. He absolutely refuses to flatter his men or manipulate them with false optimism.
No toxic positivity.
Right. We can see this clearly if we trace back to his very first speech to the paralyzed army in Book 3. He stands before thousands of terrified men, and he doesn't sugarcoat the geopolitical reality. He bluntly confirms their worst fears.
He just lays it out.
He says, yes, the Persians intend to completely destroy us. Yes, we are vastly outnumbered.
He leans directly into the terror instead of minimizing it.
He embraces the brutal facts, but then he reframes those facts using theology and historical memory. He tells them, the Persians swore a sacred oath to guarantee our safety, and they broke it. Because they broke an oath sworn to the gods are now legally and morally bound to fight on our side.
That is brilliant rhetorical jujitsu.
And he invokes the memory of their ancestors at the battles of Marathon and Salamis who faced similar massive Persian armies and won. He doesn't offer them the false hope that things will be easy. He offers them a resilient hope grounded in a brutally honest assessment of reality.
And he repeats this commitment to hard truth later in the journey in Book 7. The army finally reaches the coast and enters a Greek city called Byzantium.
They're finally out of the wilderness.
Right. The men are exhausted, they're starving, and they have just been betrayed yet again by a local official. So they snap. In a massive riot, they seize control of Byzantium. They turn to Xenophon, holding their weapons, and say, "We have the city walls, we have the gates, we have the swords. Give the word, Xenophon, and we will plunder this place, take the wealth, and finally be rich."
It is the ultimate temptation of the mob. They want their leader to validate their righteous anger and unleash them to take what they feel they are owed.
But Xenophon refuses to indulge their rage. He stands up on a platform in the middle of this riot and bluntly explains the geopolitical suicide of what they're suggesting.
It hawks them off the ledge.
He reminds them that the Peloponnesian War just ended a few years ago. Sparta is now the undisputed superpower. The Spartans control the oceans. If this mercenary army sacks a Greek city like Byzantium, the Spartan admiral Anaxagoras will declare them enemies of the state.
And that's game over.
He will blockade the ports, trap them on land, and slowly starve them into submission. He tells an armed, furious mob exactly what they don't want to hear at the exact moment they are most capable of killing him for saying it.
Which sets the stage for perhaps the most shocking and counterintuitive moment of accountability in the entire Anabasis. In Book 5, Chapter 8, the army is resting, and some soldiers formally bring legal charges against Xenophon.
This part is wild.
They accuse their commanding general of physically striking them during the brutal winter retreat through Armenia.
This detail completely broke my brain. He's the supreme commander. He's the only reason these men didn't freeze to death or get slaughtered by the Persians, and yet he voluntarily allows private soldiers to convene an assembly and put him on trial in front of the entire army.
He subjects himself to their judgment.
If a modern CEO allowed the mailroom clerks to hold a tribunal to interrogate his decisions, the board of directors would instantly fire him for losing control of the company. I mean, why would a military general submit to a public trial by an angry mob? Isn't he projecting massive weakness and inviting mutiny?
It looks like weakness to a modern observer accustomed to strict top-down structural power. But Xenophon is operating within the cultural mechanics of a Greek mercenary army, which functioned essentially as a marching democracy.
Right, they're citizens.
These hoplites weren't mindless grunts. They were voting citizens who brought their civic expectations into the military camp. Xenophon understands that evading accountability fractures trust, while embracing accountability reinforces it.
He doesn't hide behind his title.
He doesn't claim executive immunity. He doesn't shout, "I am the general, I am above your petty laws." Instead, he steps down into the assembly and methodically cross-examines his accusers.
And his defense is an absolute masterstroke.
Yeah.
A soldier stands up and yells, "You hit me." And Xenophon calmly asks, "Was I drunk? Was I settling a personal grudge against you?"
And the soldier admits he wasn't.
Then Xenophon reveals the context to the entire army. He says, "I struck you because you were actively refusing to carry your wounded comrade. You were trying to dig a hole to bury him in the snow while he was still breathing, just to lighten your load. Yes, I hit you. I used physical violence to force you to save his life."
And the result is magnificent. The Democratic Assembly of the Army, hearing the raw truth in the context of his actions, ends up shouting that Xenophon should have hit the man much harder.
It backfires on the accuser completely.
He willingly submitted to the trial because he possessed a clear conscience. He knew his actions, however harsh they appeared in the moment, were completely aligned with his stated principles of preserving the army. The leader who has nothing to hide has absolutely nothing to fear from transparent accountability.
So how does that intense commitment to truth-telling and accountability map onto the biblical view of leadership?
It maps perfectly onto the biblical role of the prophet and the watchman. In Ezekiel chapter 3, God gives Ezekiel a terrifying mandate.
The watchman on the wall.
Right. He says Ezekiel is a watchman standing on the city wall. If the watchman sees the sword coming, if he perceives the impending danger and chooses not to blow the trumpet to warn the people because he's afraid of causing a panic or being disliked, God says the people will die, but their blood will be on the watchman's hands.
That's a heavy burden.
Telling the hard truth isn't just a best practice for organizational health. It is a matter of life and death accountability before the Creator.
The Apostle Paul echoes this exact sentiment in Acts chapter 20. He is saying a tearful goodbye to the Ephesian elders on the beach, and he looks at them and says, I am innocent of the blood of all of you, for I did not shrink from declaring to you the whole counsel of God.
He told them everything.
He didn't edit out the hard theology or the difficult ethical commands just to ensure they liked him. Proverbs 27:6 lays it out perfectly. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy.
That verse is so relevant to Menon.
Yeah, Menon, the corrupt general, kissed his friends right before he betrayed them. Xenophon wounded his soldiers with hard truths and discipline in order to save them.
That is the crucial distinction. But we also see a massive divergence here regarding the direction of the accountability.
What do you mean?
Xenophon's accountability is fundamentally horizontal. He is accountable to the democratic assembly of his peers and subordinates. Biblical accountability, while it includes the horizontal aspect, is ultimately vertical.
Accountable to God.
Exactly. Consider the greatest example of leader accountability in the Old Testament. King David in 2 Samuel chapter 12. David has committed adultery with Bathsheba, orchestrated the murder of her husband Uriah to cover up the pregnancy, and comfortably assumed he got away with it.
Right.
Then the prophet Nathan walks into the throne room, tells a parable about a stolen sheep that completely bypasses David's defenses, and drops the hammer. You are the man.
And David is an absolute monarch in the ancient Near East. He could have simply snapped his fingers and had Nathan executed on the spot to silence the accusation.
He held the structural power to do exactly that. But David doesn't invoke executive immunity. He doesn't make excuses. He instantly submits to the prophetic rebuke. He says, I have sinned against the Lord.
He accepts it immediately.
He accepts accountability not because a democratic assembly of soldiers forced him to the negotiation table, but because his conscience is pierced by the reality that he is ultimately accountable to the God who anointed him king.
And we see that with Paul and Peter too, right?
Yes. We see this dynamic play out in the New Testament when the Apostle Paul publicly confronts the Apostle Peter in Galatians chapter 2. Peter was acting hypocritically regarding the Gentile believers, and Paul called him out in front of everyone.
Even the chief apostle.
In the biblical framework, absolutely no human rank, not even being the chief of the apostles or the king of Israel, grants you immunity from the truth of the gospel.
Accountability forces a leader to remain honest in the glaring light of the public square. It forces them to justify their actions. But the true test of character happens when the lights are off.
When nobody is looking.
Exactly. What happens behind closed doors when a leader is offered secret, immense wealth? This brings us to Book 7, and the ultimate test of Xenophon's integrity. The Greek army, still trying to find a secure way home, takes a job as mercenaries for a Thracian king named Seuthes.
Right.
They fight his battles, they conquer his enemies, and then Seuthes decides he doesn't want to pay them the massive wages he promised.
And the political situation becomes incredibly volatile. King Seuthes employs a conniving financial agent named Heraclides. Heraclides starts whispering in the king's ear, running a smear campaign, and actively trying to drive a wedge between Xenophon and his soldiers.
Creating division.
Right in the middle of this domestic tension, emissaries arrive from Sparta, the Lacedaemonians we mentioned earlier. The Spartans are fighting a war in Asia and offer to hire the entire Greek mercenary army.
Oh, this is the perfect out for the Thracian king.
Exactly. Heraclides sees a golden opportunity. Let the Spartans take the army away, and the Thracian king never has to pay the back wages he owes them.
And Xenophon is caught in the absolute center of this meat grinder. His men are starving and blaming him for the missing pay, the king is refusing to grant him an audience, and his political enemies are actively plotting his downfall.
He's isolated.
And in the midst of this intense pressure, Xenophon is taken aside and offered the ancient equivalent of a blank check. He is offered massive personal wealth, huge tracts of land, his pick of the spoils, and immense political power if he will simply betray his men, keep them quiet, or quietly take over a coastal city for himself and abandon the army to its fate.
He is offered everything a mercenary soldier traditionally sheds blood to acquire. The temptation is perfectly calibrated to his situation.
But he turns it down.
He categorically refuses all of it. He refuses to take a single coin of the bribe. When the army captures some spoils, he actually gives away his own personal share of the prize mule teams to the other generals to ensure they have the logistical support they need.
That's incredible.
When King Seuthes realizes Xenophon won't take a bribe, he tries to invite Xenophon to a private secret dinner to cut a backroom political deal.
A closed-door meeting.
And Xenophon refuses the private audience. He insists on bringing all the other generals with him into the room. He refuses to be isolated, he refuses the secret wealth, and he fiercely, relentlessly advocates for his men to get paid, even though it destroys his own personal relationship with the Thracian king.
He had the fortified city, he had the offer of immense money, he had the loyalty of the men. He could have established himself as a king on the coast. So what does this all mean for us today, living in a world that basically worships the hustle and taking what you can get? Xenophon's actions seem entirely alien to the modern pragmatist.
Xenophon brilliantly demonstrates that true leaders utilize their power and leverage to protect the flock, not to fleece them for personal gain.
Man, that's good.
Integrity is defined by what you do when the massive bribe is sitting on the table and you know absolutely no one is watching. If we cross over to the biblical parallel, this demand for financial integrity is one of the most relentless themes in Scripture.
Where do we see that most clearly?
Consider the prophet Samuel. When Samuel is an old man, retiring from a lifetime of judging and leading Israel, he stands before the entire assembled nation in 1 Samuel chapter 12 and issues a public, unsparing audit of his own life.
It's a remarkable scene. He essentially looks at the nation and says, "Whose ox have I taken? Whose donkey have I stolen? Tell me right now if I have ever taken a blind bribe from anyone to look the other way, and I will restore it to you."
He demands public accountability for his finances, and the entire nation responds as one, "You have not defrauded us or oppressed us or taken anything from any man's hand."
He was completely clean.
Samuel's vast moral authority to rebuke kings didn't rest just on his spiritual calling. It rested on a lifetime of public, verifiable financial integrity. The Apostle Paul operates the exact same way.
Right, in Corinth.
He writes to the church in Corinth in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, defending his ministry by stating plainly, "We have wronged no one, we have corrupted no one, we have taken advantage of no one."
It is the absolute antithesis of Menon, the corrupt general who viewed exploiting his friends as a sign of intelligence. And it immediately makes me think of the ultimate tragedy of Judas Iscariot.
Judas is the pure biblical equivalent of Menon. Judas leveraged his proximity to Jesus to secure 30 pieces of silver. He took the ultimate bribe to betray the ultimate leader, and that silver purchased nothing but a field of blood and his own eternal destruction.
It's a tragic warning.
But we have to drill down to the deep theological root of why financial corruption is so severely condemned in a biblical leader. It's not just a violation of HR policy, it is an issue of divine representation.
Representation of God.
Deuteronomy 10.1c states explicitly that the Lord your God is the God of gods, who is not partial and takes no bribe. God cannot be bought. Therefore, a corrupt leader, a pastor, an elder, or a Christian business owner who cuts unethical deals is actively bearing false witness.
They're lying about who God is.
Exactly. They are telling lies to the watching world about the nature of the God they claim to represent.
If you are leading under the banner of Christ, but your ledgers are corrupt and your integrity can be purchased, you are telling the watching world that God can be bought. That is an incredibly heavy realization.
It really is.
We've seen how Xenophon led with this towering character. He initiated bold action when others froze. He shared the agonizing physical suffering of his men in the snow. He delivered the brutal truth when they wanted flattering lies. And he possessed an integrity that could not be purchased by a king. But what was the engine driving this ancient man?
That's the key question.
What fueled this behavior? We have to examine his spiritual life. Because reading through the text, it becomes obvious that Xenophon was an intensely, deeply religious man.
He was entirely driven by his theology. The ancient Greek concept is eusebeia, which translates roughly to piety or proper reverence for the divine.
Piety.
For Xenophon, piety was never just a private internal feeling or the philosophical abstraction. It was a highly practical, highly visible, structural component of his daily leadership.
He practically ran the army on sacrifices. He slaughtered animals to read their livers before literally every major strategic decision. He constantly waited for physical omens from the gods before marching.
Right. He wouldn't move without an omen.
There's this one scene in the Anabasis that reads almost like a comedy, but it perfectly illustrates how seriously he took this. He is in the middle of delivering a massive, high-stakes, do-or-die speech to the terrified troops regarding their survival. And right in the middle of one of his sentences, a random soldier in the crowd sneezes loudly.
And to a modern reader, it's just a bodily function. But in the highly superstitious ancient Mediterranean world, a sneeze occurring during a critical moment of deliberation was universally considered a direct physical omen from the gods.
And Xenophon doesn't miss a single beat. He completely stops his grand speech, publicly declares the sneeze to be a highly favorable sign from Zeus the Savior, and immediately leads the entire army of 10,000 men in a communal, spoken vow to offer massive sacrifices to the gods the moment they reach friendly territory.
He turns a sneeze into a liturgical event.
He lived this out, too. When they finally captured spoils of war, he meticulously tithed a portion of the proceeds to Apollo and Artemis. Decades later, when he was an old man living in exile on an estate in Sicily, he actually used his share of that mercenary money to build a functioning replica of the Temple of Artemis on his land.
His commitment to Eusebeia functioned on several incredibly pragmatic levels for the army. First, it acted as a social glue.
Bringing them together.
By forcing the men to participate in these shared sacred rituals, he transformed a chaotic, fractured mob of violent mercenaries into something closely resembling a covenant community bound by divine law.
Right.
Second, it provided the soldiers with a profound psychological source of confidence that wasn't tethered to their horrific material circumstances. They could be starving and freezing, but if the omens were good, they genuinely believed the gods were marching with them.
What was the third level?
Third, and perhaps most crucially for Xenophon's own character development, his extreme piety acted as a hard structural check on his own ego. He would perform the sacrifices, and if the diviner read the entrails and said the omens were bad, Xenophon would categorically refuse to march or attack.
Even if you really wanted to.
Even if his strategic military mind desperately wanted to, he willingly submitted his own formidable intellect to what he believed was a higher divine structure.
I respect his devotion, I really do. But analyzing it from the outside, it sounds incredibly transactional. It feels like putting a silver coin in a cosmic vending machine.
That's a good way to put it.
I sacrifice this goat, and in return, you give me a good omen. I build you a nice temple, and in return, you help my army win the battle. How does this ancient mechanical piety compare to genuine biblical faith?
Well, that observation highlights the deepest, most unbridgeable divide between the ancient Greek philosophical worldview and the biblical worldview. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you identified the exact mechanic. Xenophon's gods, for all their power, were essentially impersonal, capricious forces.
Those forces of nature, basically.
They were terrifying realities to be managed, bargained with, and appeased through strict adherence to ritual, contracts, and vows.
Whereas the writer of Proverbs states in chapter 9, verse 10, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight."
Exactly the contrast we need to make. Biblical piety is never a transaction. It is a dynamic, intimate relationship with a person. Think back to Moses in Exodus chapter 33.
Oh, after the golden calf.
Right. God is frustrated with the Israelites after the golden calf incident. God tells Moses to go ahead and lead the people into the promised land, and he promises to send an angel to drive out their enemies. But God says he himself will not go with them, lest he consume them on the way for their rebellion.
And Moses' response is incredible.
Moses' reply shatters the transactional model of religion. He says, "If your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here."
Moses doesn't want the guaranteed military victory. He doesn't want the rich farmland of Canaan. And he doesn't want the blessing if he can't have the blesser. He refuses the success if God isn't personally present.
Because the text tells us that Moses speaks to God face to face, as a man speaks with his friend. Xenophon sacrifices an animal and squints at its liver to guess what an impersonal Zeus might want him to do.
Moses is talking to a friend.
Moses engages in an intimate, agonizing relational dialogue with the creator of the universe. And when we move to the New Testament, Jesus makes this relational dynamic absolute. In John 15:5, Christ tells his disciples, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing."
It's all about abiding.
Christological leadership requires actively, constantly abiding in the vine. It's an ontological connection, a sharing of life, not a transactional ritual of appeasement.
Apart from me, you can do nothing. That is a devastating critique of secular leadership methods. It means that true, eternal, spiritual leadership is literally impossible if you aren't drawing your daily life and sustenance directly from Jesus.
It is impossible.
Which finally brings us to the ultimate limits of Xenophon's ancient wisdom. Because as brilliant, courageous, and capable as Xenophon is, and he truly is a titan of human history, His system falls tragically short of the Christian vision in two massive, undeniable ways.
Yes, the limits are very clear.
The first limit is the purpose of his leadership.
We have to ask, what was Xenophon's ultimate goal? What was the finish line of the Anabasis? It was simply survival.
Just getting home.
His grandest ambition was to navigate his men out of the hostile Persian desert, get them to the coast, and disperse them back to their ordinary, mundane lives in Greece. That is an incredibly noble goal. It is a heroic achievement of logistics and grit.
Unbelievable grit.
But the narrative ends with the army fragmenting and the men scattering back to whatever they were before. There is no ultimate transformation of the soul.
They survive the crucible, but they just go back to being the exact same broken, flawed humans they were when they left.
Precisely. But the biblical goal of leadership is infinitely higher and far more demanding. Listen to how the Apostle Paul defines his mission in Colossians 1:28-29.
Oh, I love those verses.
Him we proclaim, warning everyone and teaching everyone with all wisdom, that we may present everyone mature in Christ. For this I toil, struggling with all his energy that he powerfully works within me.
It's about presenting the mature.
The goal of Christian leadership isn't just surviving the stressful week. It isn't just getting your team to hit their quarterly financial targets so everyone can go home to their suburbs in peace. The goal is the total, radical transformation of the human soul into the image and likeness of Jesus Christ.
And that leads to the final and most profound difference of all, the leader himself. Xenophon was a brilliant tactician and a deeply courageous human commander. And his crowning glory, the reason we still read his book 2.5 millennia later, is that he managed to get himself and the majority of his men out of extreme danger alive.
He got them out.
He survived the trap.
But Jesus Christ is the good shepherd who intentionally, willingly dies for the sheep. In Mark 10:45, Jesus states that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.
A ransom for many.
Xenophon led 10,000 men 1,500 miles across a hostile, freezing terrain to save their physical lives. Jesus Christ crossed the infinite cosmos, stepped into the frail reality of human flesh, took the crushing weight of our sins upon himself, walked directly into the ultimate terrifying hostility of the cross, conquered death itself, and is now leading his people all the way to the Father's house.
Wow. Xenophon saved his men from the swords of the Persians. Jesus Christ saves his people from their own crushing guilt, their internal brokenness, and the reality of eternal death. It is the vast, unbridgeable difference between a truly great general and a divine, flawless savior.
That is the ultimate contrast.
What an absolute epic journey this has been today. We have taken this deep dive into the blood-soaked sands and freezing mountains of ancient Persia, and we've seen how the very best, the absolute pinnacle of ancient human wisdom.
The initiative, the shared suffering.
Right, the courage to take initiative in the dark, the willingness to strip off your cloak and freeze in the snow with your people, the grit to look a mob in the eye and tell the hard truth, and the ironclad integrity to refuse a king's bribe. All of it perfectly anticipates and points toward the divine, perfect leadership of Christ.
It points us straight to him.
Xenophon shows us the absolute ceiling of what human leadership can accomplish. But the Bible opens the heavens and shows us what only God can do.
And as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with a deeply resonant, perhaps uncomfortable thought to wrestle with.
All right, give it to us.
Think carefully about your own daily leadership failures. Think about those moments when you lose your temper with your kids because you're exhausted, or the times you actively avoid telling a necessary hard truth at work because you dread the conflict, or the moments you quietly put your own comfort and reputation ahead of the people you are called to serve.
It's convicting.
If secular leadership at its absolute historical zenith, embodied by someone as uniquely brilliant and disciplined as Xenophon, still requires a flawless divine shepherd to actually save the sheep from their ultimate enemies, then your personal daily failures aren't just frustrating mistakes to be managed with better habits.
They're invitations.
They are profound daily invitations. They are invitations to stop exhausting yourself trying to be the ultimate savior of your family, your church, or your workplace, and to fall back in absolute reliance on the grace of the only leader who ever truly was.
You do not have to carry the weight of being the savior. The diagnostic x-ray machine of our own hearts might show a murky, broken, highly compromised picture. We might have a lot more medion in us than we want to admit.
Sadly true.
But the Good Shepherd sees that brokenness, steps down into the freezing cold right beside us, and gently, firmly leads us home. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the text. We encourage you to take these insights, examine the motivation of your own heart, and use them to fuel a deeper, more profound devotion to the true shepherd. We will see you next time.